Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 160, recording on Friday, April 24th, the morning after a wild, as someone within the NFL texted me, beginning to the NFL draft for the Minnesota Vikings. At number 18, if you've been living under a rock, you probably don't know this, but most of you probably do. The Vikings drafted Caleb Banks, a defensive tackle from the University of Florida. And we are going to talk all about that over the course of today's show, which you can find wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. We appreciate that. Apologies for me wearing a backwards hat. I'm still getting going. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify or iHeart, you can rate and review, and all of that stuff helps us out. But going to talk all through the pick. Go through every dynamic that I kind of understand with it. And then toward the end of the podcast, I'll also get to some topics, some things to look for on day two, which should be pretty busy as well. I mean, the Vikings currently have 3 picks. We'll see what happens, but looking forward to diving in a little bit deeper on what's possible on day 2. This show is presented by First Resource Bank. You should know about it by now, and I expect that you do. It is a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area, run by really good people. Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, and Charlie Anderson. These guys are Vikings fans. I can't imagine their reaction to the Banks pick. I need to send some text and fire off to get some commentary from those guys, but they've got a phenomenal online banking platform, and they have a bank that is as invested in the community as any. And I appreciate that as someone who moved here and can't say enough about how fun and cool this place has been to be a part of. Show's also sponsored by ProMN Athletics. We've talked about it a lot over the last few shows, but it is really the hub of development for youth football, in my opinion, in the Minnesota region. 3 guys came, Graham, Kurt, and Tanner. These guys came together and they're like, how can we lift the tide for football development in Minnesota? So they've got academies. They have a 7-on-7 league. They involve former Gophers players like Tanner Morgan and some of his buddies who want to help out. So please go check out ProMN. All right. We'll get right to Caleb Banks. Here we go. It was definitely a shocker. The Vikings knew on the front end that it probably would, that it could be a shocker if the board fell a certain way. Because teams have internal systems that typically give them the picks before they become public. I got a text, and I wrote this in the story at The Athletic about this entire pick from Thursday night, but I got a text from someone that said, wow, before it had hit publicly. And at that point, you're obviously starting to inch forward in your seat because you don't know what happened. But, it was always kind of an interesting dynamic in the lead up to this draft because I said this many times on the podcast, and I also, in writing, try to make this as clear as possible. Like, I never heard that the Vikings were definitely committed to doing Dylan Thieneman, the Oregon safety, who was the most popular, frequent mock selection at number 18. And throughout the entire process, when you don't hear something like that, your antenna's up one way or another. It's like, when you guys might be wondering what's it like doing the job, it's you're filtering through information of what's real, what's not, how much is this a mock selection because it's convenient versus actually kind of the truth of the matter. And so with the idea that I never gathered a direct link that the Vikings would do that at 18, you're always kind of on the hunt in my position for, okay, what would that look like? A guy who made sense to me was Kenyon Sadiq, the Oregon tight end, because he had the potential of a blue chip, Pro Bowl, all pro caliber potential. But once the Jets plucked him from the board at number 16, which I knew even then, I mean, I think if you go back to, it might've been the Power Trip mock draft that I did on KFAN, I think I said then that like the Jets might be a landmine for Kenyon Sadiq. It obviously was, and so at that point, um, the two things on my mind were: are they going to trade back? Who wants to come up? And are the Vikings willing to risk the idea that they cannot get their guy, who at that point was Caleb Banks, the defensive tackle from Florida? Um, like, could they trade back, and then could another team pluck him from the board? I know you guys are probably like, well, that's not possible. None of the consensus, none of the projections had Caleb Banks going before the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. What I would say is, even in the lead up to the draft, um, there was a varying levels of interest from multiple teams in the 20s, picking in the 20s on Caleb Banks. I mean, you saw ultimately that the Kansas City Chiefs picked Peter Woods, the defensive tackle from Clemson, at 29. The Kansas City Chiefs are also a team that is not afraid. If there is a player on their board that they love, they will go up and get them. The Kansas City Chiefs are also a team that has Chris Jones, who is the most popular comparison when you talk to people in the industry about Caleb Banks if he reaches his ultimate potential. I mean, there were, the Houston Texans, there was a lot of kind of smoke about them potentially being in the market for a defensive tackle. They, I do think they had a lot of calls to potentially trade up. And then the Chargers were very much a wild card for a lot of different people who I talked to in the industry, of like, what are they going to do if Vega, the guard, is off the board, if they decide to go defense, what would they do? They ended up drafting Akeem Mesidor, who is kind of an edge interior rusher. So would they have, taken the stab at Caleb Banks at 22? You can never really be sure. And so I think from the Viking standpoint, if that was it was the player who they were so convicted on, and you try to get creative and then you miss out on your guy, that's a tough place to be. But I mean, you guys are probably wondering the questions of why didn't they trade back? Why would they be willing to make the decision based on the medical evaluation? I mean, I do oftentimes, in this, like, I'm not sure how if this is a warranted ramble or tangent for me, but I do kind of, I wouldn't say laugh, but I think it's interesting oftentimes that a lot of fans, have a perspective on the medical, which, I mean, I know nothing about a lot of the medical. And so it's a lot of projection, or there is obviously a common sense component of big guy with feet problems. I mean, you've seen it with Joel Embiid. There's a lot of other athletes across the industry, across all sports, where you see it, but the specifics of Caleb Banks' medical are like, it's not something that the public is privy to. And so I mean, the Vikings ultimately deemed by all of their evaluation that this would not be something that would doom his future. And I mean, I will say that, like, I mean, I'm speaking Friday morning. I like 20, 30 minutes ago, I got off the phone with Billy Napier, who was the Florida coach who's now at James Madison. And he said this to me. He's like, you know, the, like, this guy has the potential to be a generational type of player, and he did not mince words saying that. I'll have a more full quote, because he was phenomenal at some point in future stories at the Athletic that you can look for. But he's like, even in the past 5-10 years, like, there aren't a lot of these guys who are 6'6", 325 pounds, 35-inch arm length. They move like they are basketball players, which Caleb Banks was a former basketball player. They have a competitive streak to them. They are, I mean, Billy Napier said this, like, he is intelligent on the board. And like, has, just a lot of the special stuff that all of you guys listening to this and watching it have seen the Vikings go up against for years. I mean, Kevin O'Connell, I asked him on Thursday night, like, to now have potentially one of these guys who you've talked about and gone up against and stressed over many, many times over the last 4 years. Like, how nice is that? I mean, when you're thinking about the Jalen Carters and the Dexter Lawrences and I mean, you could just rattle off all of those, Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy the second, like those guys, are menacing. Now, I do think there is a question of, well, Brian Flores' defense is so good at creating pressure. How does this change the calculus? Will he lean into more four-man rush? What does that mean for the coverage? What does that like? Those are conversations that are going to be interesting and fun to have. But I will just say, talking to Billy Napier and talking to multiple other staffers from the University of Florida, who were alongside Caleb Mank's development from arriving as a young player from Louisville and watching him grow. Like, I mean, the lofty nature and the way they talk about what Caleb Banks can be, it makes this selection understandable. I mean, I when you're, and I said this earlier this week, maybe on the podcast, but when you're picking in the first round, the hope from a team's perspective, and Howie Roseman said, the Philadelphia Eagles GM literally said this past week, is the hope is you land a blue chip player who becomes a star caliber player. In this specific draft, there were not a lot of these guys. There just weren't. And so the Vikings decided that they were going to take the swing on one of those guys, potential guys. And there obviously comes risk to that. I mean, Rob Brzezinski, the interim GM, said Thursday night, like, there is risk with every pick. Again, they obviously felt comfortable with that level of risk. And I'd say it's a big bet on the doctors. It's a big bet on the medical staff. And it's a big bet on the organization's ability to develop as a whole. I mean, I would say one of the positions they've done a great job of developing in recent years has been defensive tackle, whether it's Jalen Redmond or Levi Drake Rodriguez, Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, Elijah Williams. Like, that is a position that they've been willing to take certain guys who are a bit more raw, and those guys have definitely developed. Now, a caveat to that is Marcus Dixon, the D-line coach, now is in Dallas. So he's no longer. Now, the replacement, Ryan Nielsen, is really highly regarded throughout the industry. So you feel probably pretty good there if you're the Vikings. But it's a bet on staff. It's a bet on ability to challenge. It's a bet on, the infrastructure and maximizing who a player can be. And the Vikings, over the course of the last 4 years, really since I got here in 2022, like, there have been a lot of times where they're willing to make these bets, and some of them work out. I mean, like Byron Murphy Jr., the cornerback, like that, they signed him for a very minuscule deal. It worked out. Jonathan Grenard, Blake Cashman, Andrew Van Ginkel. I mean, I remember when Andrew Van Ginkel signed in free agency, talking to a Miami Dolphins executive in the immediate aftermath, and him saying, that's my favorite player on our team. He just couldn't stay healthy. And, for the most part, Andrew, and obviously he missed games in 2025, but he has been so highly impactful, and that bet has paid off. So there are examples on both sides, and this is going to be an example, I would say, of how much this organization can maximize a certain player at a level that will be scrutinized as much as any other, probably besides quarterback, because of all of the dynamics at play. I wrote this too. It was pretty, like, wild to me, but the Vikings hadn't taken an interior defensive lineman in the first round since 2013. That was Sharif Floyd, who, I mean, obviously you will generate a reaction from you guys. He also obviously a Florida product, but I mean, to go 13 years without taking a big bodied guy on the interior in the first round is pretty wild. This one, of course, comes with risk, but you probably aren't ever going to hear me after having covered this league for 4 seasons and knowing what the best teams have. You're probably never going to hear me get mad or get or get real critical on the idea of taking trenches early. I mean, it's just never something that I would argue against, because it often can be the bridge to very elite caliber play. The other note that I had in the story at The Athletic that astounded me, um, is Brian Flores got here in 2023. He's been here for 3 seasons. They've had really good defenses. You guys know this. You don't need me to tell you this. But in that span, they have had, before Thursday night, they had used one top 100 pick on a defender. Like I couldn't. It was pretty wild to hear that. The only pick on a defender in the top 100 since Brian Flores got here was Dallas Turner, who was a first rounder, obviously, at number 17 in 2024. But I mean, when you think about Mekhi Blackman, I think that was pick 102. When you think about Kyrie Jackson, that was pick 108. And you think about a lot of guys, it is a, I would say, snapshot of the amount that this coaching staff has maximized the defense. It is also a snapshot of the success they've had in many spurts in free agency, and also the success they've gotten out of guys who were picks um, before Kwesi Adofo-Mensah even got here in 2022, which is probably like a testament to the final couple drafts of Rick Spielman. But I would say, like, waking up this morning thinking about it on the drive back from the facility last night, my biggest kind of thought was, this is a big bet on the organization's ability to develop and get the best out of a player. And it will be a revelatory kind of road to evaluate over time. And again, if it hits, if he stays healthy, if he reaches his full potential, it's a lot of ifs. And I used to say, when I covered baseball and you go through a lineup, I used to cover the Kansas City Royals for 3 years. And when you go through a lineup, the number of if this player can hit, if this player is seeing the ball well, if, like, that makes me more uncomfortable. There's no question about that. But there are instances in every sport where those ifs go the right way, and you're looking at a game-changing talent. So yeah, much more to come at The Athletic, both Friday afternoon and the coming days. Have gotten a lot of contacts down at Florida, so we'll try to come to you probably at some point this week with as in-depth a story on Caleb Banks as you'll be able to find. But again, believe he's from the Midwest. He went to Louisville, barely played there. Florida worked him out. They loved the traits. He got there, and then there was a lot of growth and a lot of maturity. And I mean, Billy Napier said this to me. He's like, in the NIL era, for a guy to injure his foot like he did in 2025, and then work as hard as he did and stay as engaged as he did to then come back and play at the end of the season. Like, Billy Napier asked me, he's like, "What do you think that says?" So that's what I'd say. I'd say there. As far as day 2, all right, so as things currently stand, you guys know this, it's not groundbreaking information. The Vikings have 3 picks, number 49, number 82, and number 97. Simultaneously, they have a lot of needs. So wide receiver depth would be one of them. The center spot would be another. Defensive back, safety, slot corner, what's going to happen there. Cornerback, just in general, I know the Vikings haven't invested a ton in the spot, but I'm always for reinforcements at that position. And then the wild card for day 2 and Friday night would be, if the Vikings were to trade Jonathan Grenard, that would obviously create a very big need for an edge rusher. You guys are probably listening to this, so Alec, what is the likelihood that Jonathan Grenard is traded? I mean, I've said this from pretty much the very beginning. The Vikings don't want to trade Jonathan Grenard unless they get a premium return. I mean, they've never really wanted to trade him. It's just the contract that he has been seeking is sizable. And if I'm not mistaken, Jonathan Grenard's going to turn 29 next month. So, I guess the question that you guys are asking that I've even asked aloud and asked the people is like, well, what is a premium return that makes sense? Is it a day? Is it a round 2 pick plus more? Is it a round 3 pick plus more? It's kind of that is obviously in the eye of the beholder. The overall point would be that if Jonathan Grenard, if a trade were to happen on Friday, then the idea of taking an edge rusher would definitely climb, climb up from a priority perspective. And I'd say there are this is a pretty good edge rusher class, bunch of different types of players. Some who are, you could throw out 250-pound type guys who have athleticism, some more 260-pound guys who are real, have real, I would say, explosion in their hands and kind of, with their arm length. So a lot of routes I think that it could go at receiver. And there's a story at The Athletic that is just best available name. So if you want all of them for day 2, head over there, please. But I'll just give a couple. Receiver, the 2 guys I'd be watching are DeJon Stribling from Ole Miss, big-bodied receiver. Have a coach down there who I know who absolutely raved about him, can really help a team in the run blocking phase. And then there's probably upside there from a route running development standpoint, but really productive guy, and really high character guy. And then Jeremy Bernard from Alabama. As an Alabama guy, I watched a lot of him, and every third down, he was the guy they targeted. Every trick play, he's running motions and taking jet sweeps. Their offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, seemed to have as much trust in in Jeremy Bernard as any skill player on Alabama's team. And is he eye popping on some of the athleticism metrics that you'd have at the combine? No, but then you look at some of the more advanced stuff, and he is fluid. He does find pockets and zones. He is reliable. So will either of these guys get to 49? It's a question I have because I've had a lot of conversations where other teams are interested, but those 2 names are top of mind there. At center, I think I'd probably throw out 3, and it would be Jake Slaughter from Florida, another Florida guy. So maybe I'll just, we just roll it with Gators. Logan Jones from Iowa, and Sam Heck from Kansas State. And then if you're talking like the slot corner DB, slot corner-ish, slot defender, safety type of player, Traden Stukes from Arizona is a name who's top of mind for sure. And then later on, you're probably talking like a Jalen Kilgore from South Carolina or Kamari Ramsey from USC. But there are a bunch of prospects there. And again, like I have a full list of names. It's like probably 12 or more. And there's linebacker names in there, off-ball linebacker names. There's edge defender names in there. So please go check that out over at theathletic.com. Also have the full all-encompassing, everything I could include story on Caleb Banks at The Athletic from Thursday night. Had one AFC scout give me a scouting report from a couple years ago on Caleb Banks, and then just some context there to all of it. But yeah, that'll do it, I think, for episode 160. Thought I'd rip one real quick in the morning, and then depending on what happens tonight, I might be back here on your feeds via YouTube, via audio, depending on what happens on day 2, and then I'll look ahead to day 3. But yeah, appreciate you guys being here. The show is presented by First Resource Bank. Please go check out ProMN Athletics, which is as invested as anybody who I know in raising the tide for youth development of football in the Minnesota area. And then Unreal, I'm repping their clothing brand, their US Open hat, which is at Shinnecock Hills, because I haven't well coiffed my hair getting ready for what will be a fun afternoon press conference, and then obviously covering the picks tonight. You can find a lot of our feeds. I'm at Alec underscore Lewis on Twitter. The show's feeds at Alec Lewis Show. I did kind of a pop-up Q&A on Instagram at Alec Lewis Show, where I did kind of tease the Banks thing last night. So if you want, we've got there's nuggets being dispersed in a lot of different areas, and having a lot of fun doing it. Any other questions you guys have, toss them in the comments, toss them at me on social media, and I'll try to get to as many as possible, because I know there are a lot of them. Enjoy day 2 of the draft. Enjoy the weekend here in the Twin Cities, and we will talk to you very, very soon.